2 years after I gave my spot to go back to the city to the man I loved, I showed up, road-weary, to find him. But there he was, the man who'd sworn his undying love for me, shopping with a pregnant woman. He avoided my gaze, his expression a mix of annoyance and exhaustion. Look, those years were just a mistake, born from us clinging to each other for comfort in a tough situation. How could I ever be into men? Let's just pretend none of it ever happened. Now, living it all over again, I decided to keep my distance. But this time, he was the one who panicked, grabbing my arm with a trembling voice. "Gary, I'm the one you love. Have you forgotten me?" The world spun as I stared at the man ahead, carefully helping a pregnant woman along the street. Soon his eyes met mine. The smile vanished from his face, and his hand shot back from the woman's arm as if he'd been burned. "Brian, what's wrong?" the woman asked, curious. Brian forced a tight smile. "I just ran into an old acquaintance. Let me chat with him for a second." "You go sit down and rest." He then rushed over and pulled me aside. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with irritation. My expression went flat. "When you left last year, you told me to wait for you. But you never answered any of my letters. I was worried something had happened, so I came to the city to find you." Brian fell silent. "Who is that woman? Your wife?" His eyelids twitched violently. "Yes." Even though I'd suspected it, hearing him confirm it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The panic that he was in trouble, the hardship of the journey, the anticipation of seeing the man I loved after so long, it all collapsed into a cruel joke. Brian took a deep breath. When he looked at me again, his eyes held both guilt and weariness. "Gary, we're both adults. Let's just go our separate ways. We can forget the past few years, just pretend none of it ever happened." I wanted to laugh, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Brian, are you even human? You begged me to give you my spot so you could go back and take the college entrance exams. You swore you'd establish yourself in New York City and wait for me. I gave up my chance to leave, gave you all my savings for books and test prep, and now you're telling me to pretend it never happened?" The color drained from Brian's face. He seemed to lash out in shame, pulling a wad of cash from his coat and throwing it at me. "It was just a couple $100, right? Here's 10 times that. Is that enough? 100 times? I looked at Brian in disappointment, dressed in a tailored shirt with perfectly styled hair. He was a world away from the earnest young man who used to recite love poems to me on a hillside in the morning breeze. I murmured, "So this is who you really are." The initial panic of seeing me finally faded from Brian's face, replaced by a smirk. "Gary, you're still so naive. If you really love me and can't bear to leave me, I suppose I could keep supporting you. As long as you don't interfere with my real life or bother my family, we can keep things the way they were." A wave of shame and fury washed over me. I slapped him hard across the face. Without another glance at the disgusting man, I turned and walked away. Back in Clear Creek, I was so lost in my despair that I missed a step and fell into the river. The agony of dying, the memories of my years with Brian, and the image of his faithless face swirled in my mind. The last thing I saw was a tall figure diving unhesitatingly into the water, swimming desperately toward me. I blinked weakly one last time before everything went black. The snow this year was too heavy and it collapsed the volunteer dorms. We'll have to split everyone up to stay with the local families. I know it's not ideal, but we'll all have to make do. Space is tight, so you'll have to double up, 2 to a bed. The director's signature booming voice cut through my hazy thoughts. Before me, a large group of volunteers and villagers were gathered in front of the director's house, clamoring and debating the housing arrangements. I stared at the familiar scene, feeling a sense of dislocation. Wasn't this from 3 years ago, when we first moved in with the villagers? It was the beginning of everything, when sharing a bed turned my friendship with Brian into something else, and the start of all my mistakes. "Gary, you and Brian are close. How about you two stay at Mr. Huang's place?" Hearing the director's words, a jolt went through me. If Brian thought our love was a shameful mistake, then this time I would set things right from the start. "No." I opened my mouth to speak, but another voice cut me off first. "No, I don't want to be with Gary. I'll take Gary." I froze and turned my head. There was Brian, his face youthful but his expression agitated. Noticing my gaze, Brian looked away and grabbed the arm of a heavy-set guy next to him. "Gary, you room with me, okay?" Gary scratched his head, completely baffled. "But I thought you and Gary were best friends back at the dorms. You two even agreed to pick the same house before we came over. Why the sudden change of heart?" Brian stammered, unable to come up with an explanation. His face flushed red. "I just don't want to room with him anymore. So are you in or not?" Watching Brian's bizarre behavior, a thought bloomed in my mind. Could it be? Was he reborn, too? Gary glanced over at me. I just smiled and shrugged, then scanned the crowd of villagers, my eyes finally landing on a familiar figure. It was him, the man who had jumped into the water to save me in my past life. A real smile spread across my face as I pointed at him. "I'll take Mason." The moment I said it, the other volunteers stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Even the Clear Creek locals gasped softly. The reason was simple. Everyone saw Mason as a quiet loner who gave off a seriously intimidating vibe. He'd been in the army, a combat vet who'd seen action. All the other volunteers had deliberately overlooked him, preferring to cram 2 or 3 to a bed in worse conditions rather than dare ask to stay at his place. But after what happened in my previous life, I knew Mason was actually a kind man with a tough exterior. The director's wrinkled face tightened with worry. He was afraid Mason would refuse, and if Mason got angry, a guy my size wouldn't last a few punches. He was about to persuade me to pick someone else when Mason, who had been silent the whole time, spoke up with a deep voice and stepped forward to take my luggage. "Let's go. I'll show you where to put your things." And so, under the stunned gazes of everyone, and Brian's complex expression of anger, regret, and relief, I followed Mason to his house. Only when I got inside did I realize his house had just one bed. Mason noticed my discomfort. He placed my bedding on the bed, then pulled a thin mattress onto the floor. "You sleep on the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." I was shocked when he finished setting up and actually prepared to lie down. On a snowy night like this, no matter how thick the padding was, you couldn't sleep on the floor. He only had one thin mattress, even a man of iron couldn't take that. I quickly grabbed his sleeve. "No." I looked around the room, then gritted my teeth. "We'll both sleep on the bed." Mason's voice was low. "You're not used to sleeping with other people." I spread his mattress back on the bed and burrowed into my own blankets, mumbling, "1 person per set of bedding. It's not that different from the dorms." I said that, but once Mason got into bed, my whole body gradually tensed up. Even though the dorm was just a big open bunkhouse, the room was always filled with the sounds of dozens of people grinding their teeth and snoring. Now, with the lights out, the room was silent. The man beside me was sleeping stiffly, trying to take up as little space as possible, but his presence was overwhelming. I could feel the warmth radiating from his side, which only made my own blankets feel colder. I thought I'd be awake for hours, but maybe it was from sheer exhaustion, because before I knew it, I drifted off. Even in sleep, I was cold. Half dreaming, my hand brushed against something warm, and my chilled body instinctively leaned toward it. When I woke up the next morning, I found 2 quilts covering me. I hurried to the communal dining hall for breakfast, after which the director assigned the day's tasks. "Things aren't too busy for the next few days. We'll stick to the previous groups. Some of you will chop firewood on the mountain, some will clear snow from the paths, and another group will repair the volunteer dorms." He scanned the roster in his hand and started calling out names. "Jack, you 5 will clear snow. Lynn, you 8 will work on the dorms. Gary, Brian, you 4 will chop firewood. The snow is deep on the mountain, so those of you chopping wood should pair up. Don't get lost." As soon as the director finished, a dissenting voice piped up, just as I expected. "I'll clear snow instead. Or I can help with the dorms," Brian said, rushing over to the director. The director frowned, his face darkening. The teams were already set. "Weren't you and Gary working well together?" The director was usually easygoing, but when he got angry, no one dared to cross him. Everyone assumed Brian was just having a whim, but he stood there stubbornly. "I just don't want to go chop wood." Now, it was obvious to everyone that he was deliberately avoiding me. The atmosphere grew awkward. Dozens of eyes shifted between Brian and me, everyone wondering what I'd done to make him so openly hostile. I pressed my lips together. My suspicion had now become a certainty. Brian was reborn, too, and it seemed he was also determined to set things right. This time around, we both couldn't stand the sight of each other, wishing the other had never entered our lives. Seeing the director was in a tough spot, I spoke up. "It's fine, director. I can go by myself." As I was grabbing my tools to head into the mountains alone, I ran into Mason, who was also holding a wood axe. "I'm gonna chop wood too, director. Let him come with me." The director's eyes lit up. "Great. Mason, you look after Gary." The snow on the mountain was deep and soft. One wrong step and you could sink up to your thigh. Thankfully, Mason was there to give me a hand every now and then, and I managed to gather enough firewood. On the way back, my foot caught on a tree root hidden under the snow, and I went tumbling down the slope. By the time Mason helped me up, a branch had gouged a deep, bloody gash in my calf. I was hissing in pain, wondering how I'd get down the mountain, when my body suddenly felt weightless. Mason had lifted me onto his back. My back instantly went rigid as it met his broad, warm one. He noticed my movement and said in a low, firm voice, "Don't move. I'll get you back right away." Even carrying me, his descent was much faster than our climb up. When we got back down, the dried blood on my leg shocked everyone. People crowded around, chattering with concern. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brian hovering at the edge of the group, his face a mess of conflict as he stared in our direction. Before I could get a clearer look, Mason had already rushed me back to his house and was rolling up my pant leg to treat the wound. Luckily, the bleeding had stopped. The wound looked scary but wasn't too serious. I awkwardly pulled my leg back from Mason's grasp. "Thanks. It's not a big deal. You can go take care of your own stuff." Mason silently got up and left, but he returned a moment later with a basin of hot water. Before I could say anything, he had already taken off my shoes. "The director said you're off duty for today. Wash your feet and get some rest in bed." I was so stunned by his unexpected gesture that I froze on the spot. I knew Mason was a kind person under his gruff exterior, but I never imagined he'd offer to wash my feet. That was a level of kindness I hadn't prepared for. "What the hell are you two doing?" As I sat there in a daze, a sharp, angry voice shattered the quiet in the room. I looked up and saw Brian, his fists clenched and his face contorted with rage. I frowned and pulled my foot back. "Is there something you need?" I asked coolly. Brian's anger flared even hotter. "I saw you were hurt and came to bring you some medicine. Gary, what were you and Mason just doing? Don't you think you owe me an explanation?" I looked up at Brian, and seeing the fury in his eyes, I found it almost laughable. "We're not even friends. Why would I owe you an explanation for anything?" The words hit him like a bucket of cold water. He froze, the angry flush draining from his face. Mason didn't even bother to acknowledge Brian. He stood up and arranged my quilt. "You should lie down and rest. I'll go get your food from the dining hall later." Brian stood there awkwardly, his gaze suddenly catching the two sets of bedding on the single bed. He stared for a second, and when it clicked, his voice shot up. "You're sleeping together? Why was this guy still here?" I shot him a look, my expression one of undisguised indifference. "Mason already treated my leg. You can go now." Hearing me not deny it, Brian's breathing grew ragged. "You can't sleep together. Gary, go tell the director right now that you need to switch houses." I couldn't believe how absurd he was being. "What business is it of yours whether Mason and I sleep together?" "What do you mean it's not my business?" "You're my—" He stopped abruptly, his face turning shades of red and white under my steady gaze. Finally, a look of profound disgust settled on his face. "Two men sleeping in the same bed. Aren't you ashamed?" He stared at me, a twisted smile on his lips. "Gary, you're still young. Don't go down the wrong path. I'm just trying to help you. Besides..." He glanced at Mason, his expression dripping with contempt. "A country bumpkin like that? You're really not picky." Seeing his condescending smirk, memories I had tried so hard to bury came flooding back. His face suddenly overlapped with the one from my past life. My expression turned to ice. I was about to demand that Brian apologize to Mason when a fist flew past me, sending Brian sprawling to the floor. Mason stood over him, his face dark and his presence radiating menace. "Get out." Brian scrambled up from the floor, shocked that Mason would actually hit him. He was even more shocked that I hadn't even spared him a glance after he'd been punched, and was instead telling him to apologize to Mason. His eyes widened in disbelief. "You want me to apologize to him? Didn't you see he just hit me?" The more he spoke, the angrier he got. His initial fear of Mason's ferocity was now completely overshadowed by indignation. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a stool from the floor and swung it violently at Mason's back. "Look out." Mason had his back to Brian. Hearing my shout, he spun around, but the stool still slammed into his right shoulder, leaving a dark bruise. He then snatched the stool away and, with a sharp twist, dislocated Brian's wrist. Brian's scream brought the director running. When he saw the scene in the room, Mason looking fierce and Brian on the floor, cradling his wrist and groaning in pain, the director immediately jumped to a conclusion. "Mason, you assaulted one of the volunteers. Do you want to get arrested?" The penalties for crimes were harsh back then. A jolt of panic went through me, and I quickly stood up to explain. "Director, Brian insulted Mason first, and he attacked him from behind with a stool. Mason was just defending himself." On the floor, Brian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at me. "Brian, is that true?" the director asked, looking at him skeptically. I ignored the look of betrayal and anger in Brian's eyes and just shot him a warning glance. After all, I was telling the truth. Brian had called Mason a country bumpkin. If that got out, his time in Clear Creek would be over. He understood my silent warning, and his body began to tremble with rage. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "Director, it was all a misunderstanding." As the director helped him leave, Brian looked back at me one last time. He bit his lip hard, his eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and sorrow. He looked at me as if I was the one who'd broken his heart. After everyone left, it was just Mason and me in the room. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling guilty. Brian was having a meltdown. "Don't take anything he said to heart. Your shoulder got hit. Let me put some ointment on it." Mason paused, then gave a low hum of agreement. I didn't expect him to take a shower first. When he came back to the bed, he was wearing only a slightly worn white undershirt. The solid muscles of his bare arms rippled with strength, and a large, dark bruise was visible on his shoulder and back. "Take off your shirt. It looks like it got your back, too." Mason obediently pulled off the undershirt. His bronze skin looked healthy and sensual, and the contrast with the dark bruise made my face feel strangely warm. I didn't dare look at his bare torso and quickly shifted my gaze to his face. His sharp, angular face with its buzz cut came into view. His profile was chiseled with a strong, hard jawline. I then noticed that the muscles in his arms and abdomen were tensed up. "Are you cold? I'll put the ointment on right away." I didn't dare look anywhere else. I quickly applied the medicine and then pushed him back under the covers. The winter air was frigid, and once you were in bed, it was hard to resist burrowing into the warmth. Thinking I had nothing else to do today, I finally gave in to the allure of the cozy bed, took off my outer clothes, and slipped under my own covers. The moment I lay down, I noticed that Mason, who was lying so quietly I could barely hear him breathe, had his eyes closed, but the tips of his ears were bright red. Young guys run so hot, I thought with a hint of envy, instinctively curling my own ice-cold feet away. After resting all afternoon, my leg wasn't hurting as much by the evening. Feeling partly responsible for Mason's injury, I insisted on making dinner for him. Mason couldn't argue with me and finally relented. "Why don't you eat with me, then? I have some meat left. We can have pork and potato stew tonight." The food at the volunteer dining hall was mediocre at best. I hadn't eaten meat in ages. That night, I put all my cooking skills to use making the stew, and it was so delicious I almost swallowed my own tongue. After dinner, I felt like Mason and I had finally become friends. The temperature dropped sharply that night. Normally I'd be fast asleep, but tonight I was so cold I felt like I was turning into an ice sculpture. As I lay there shivering, I suddenly felt a weight settle over me. I pried my eyes open to see Mason laying his own quilt on top of me. A wave of warmth spread through my chest. I was about to thank him, but the words caught in my throat when I saw what he did next. Mason moved to the foot of the bed and wrapped his warm hands around my ice-cold feet. My mouth fell open, my eyes wide with shock. I instinctively started to pull my feet back but stopped myself. If I woke up now, it would be even more awkward, wouldn't it? My body went rigid, and I didn't dare move a muscle as my mind, now a complete fog, tried to figure out his intentions. A steady warmth spread from his hands, and I slowly felt the side of my body closer to him begin to warm up too. My brain turned to mush. In this rare winter warmth, I somehow drifted off to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, Mason was already gone from the bed, and I was still covered by 2 quilts. Time for breakfast. I turned around and met Mason's eyes. The memory of last night flooded my mind, and my face immediately flushed red. No, it's okay. I'll eat at the dining hall. I threw on my clothes and rushed outside, only to run straight into Brian, whose face was dark and sullen. I frowned and started to walk around him, but he reached out and grabbed my arm. Come with me. I need to talk to you. Other villagers were watching, and I didn't want to cause a scene, so I agreed. Brian pulled me to a hillside behind the village. He turned to me, his tone a warning. Gary, stay away from Mason. Seeing my frown, he cut me off. I'm doing this for your own good. One day you'll thank me for pulling you back onto the right path. I don't need your help. Just worry about yourself, I said, my expression mocking as I turned to leave. Brian panicked, his voice a mix of bluster and desperation. Are you telling me you actually want to stay in the countryside forever? Getting mixed up with some village hick? Do you really want to stoop that low? Smack! I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. There is nothing between us. And even if there was something going on between me and Mason, it's none of your business. After leaving him with those cold words, I turned and walked away, not caring about the stunned, lost look on his face. Today's work was light, helping the villagers clear snow off their roofs and from the fronts of their houses. Because of what happened last night, I spent the whole day trying my best to avoid Mason. It wasn't until the sky grew dark and the last of the other volunteers had no interest in sitting outside discussing poetry with me that I finally had to drag my feet back to Mason's house. I glanced into the kitchen and happened to see Mason lifting a large bucket of water with his right hand to pour it into the water tank. My eyes narrowed. Pretending I hadn't seen anything, I backed out of the kitchen and then walked back in, making my footsteps heavier. How's your arm? Do you need me to put more ointment on it tonight? There was a loud thud from inside. When I looked again, Mason was standing with his right arm at his side, the bucket on the floor. He kept his head down, not daring to look at me, and just nodded grimly. Yes, if you don't mind. A small smile played on my lips, but I quickly suppressed it. All right then, off with the shirt. I'll go wash up first. I leaned back on the bed, reading a book. When I heard footsteps, I looked up to see Mason walking toward me, shirtless. His body was still damp, and water droplets trickled down his sculpted muscles. My eyelashes fluttered, and I buried my head in my book, tossing him a towel. Dry yourself off. Don't get the bed wet. Before applying the ointment, I deliberately washed my hands in cold water and then pressed my frigid hand firmly onto his right shoulder. Cold? I asked with a mischievous grin, intentionally moving my icy hand all over his shoulder. Mason buried his face in his arms, his ears bright red, and shook his head. Not cold. Seeing how earnest he was, I didn't have the heart to tease him anymore. I quickly finished applying the ointment and pulled my hand away. As Mason was making the bed for the night, I suddenly spoke up. Let's share. The snow's gotten heavier these past few days, and it's too cold to sleep alone. Mason froze, his back still to me. You don't want to? I asked deliberately. No. Mason shook his head quickly. Then, as if realizing he sounded too eager, he added in a low, husky voice, It is getting colder at night. Huddled under 2 quilts, it was much warmer. More importantly, I could feel a constant source of heat radiating from the human furnace beside me. I was just about to doze off when I vaguely heard Mason say something. What? Sure, whatever, I mumbled, rolling over and falling into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I saw Mason waiting for me with a plate of fried eggs. He handed the plate to me. Eat up. Eggs were a luxury back then. I couldn't accept something for nothing, so I waved my hands. No, you eat them. I'll just go to the dining hall. But Mason frowned. Didn't we agree yesterday? I'm not a good cook, so from now on, I'll provide the ingredients, you do the cooking, and we'll eat together. I stared at him, dumbfounded. This deal was an incredible bargain for me. The food at the volunteer dining hall was terrible, usually just thin soup, cornbread, and sorghum rice. Meat was a rare sight. In my past life, my health had suffered greatly from the poor diet during these years. Right now, that egg was practically glowing in my eyes. I don't know, I said, swallowing hard as I tried to resist. Mason pushed the bowl into my hands. There's nothing to feel bad about. My cooking skills are a waste of good food anyway. We agreed yesterday. You can't back out. Oh, okay. In the end, I caved to the temptation of real food and nodded. After half a day's work, the volunteers started calling out to each other as they headed to the dining hall. I waved them off. I'm not going. I have to get back and cook for Mason. Gary teased. Gary, you're acting like Mason's little wife. Get out of here, I said, giving Gary a light punch. Gary didn't back down, grinning as he shouted, It's true. Everyone, tell me I'm wrong. He skips the dining hall just to rush back and cook for Mason. Even a real wife isn't that dedicated. The other volunteers burst into laughter. Clang. The sudden sound of a metal basin hitting the ground cut through the laughter. Everyone turned to see Brian, his face dark, glaring daggers at Gary. Gary was so startled he immediately shut his mouth. It was just a joke. Gary isn't even mad. I don't know what Brian's so worked up about. I paid it no mind and looked away. Before I could get back to Mason's house, Brian caught up from behind and blocked my path. I looked at him, annoyed. Could you please move? Mason will be back from town any minute. His face was exceptionally grim. Eating with him, sleeping with him. Have you really started thinking of yourself as Mason's wife? I shot him a cold look. Don't assume everyone has a mind as dirty as yours. My mind is dirty? Brian's voice rose. Are you telling me Mason doesn't have any improper thoughts about you? Villagers could pass by the intersection at any moment. I didn't want to argue with him anymore, so I tried to walk around him. How many times do I have to say it? My life is none of your business. Stop bothering me. Brian's face was a mixture of red and white. He seemed to have lost all control, blurting out, We're the ones who are supposed to be together. You're my partner, so why shouldn't I have a say in what you do? I stopped dead in my tracks and turned back, my voice laced with disgust and pain. If you've lost your mind, go see a doctor at the town clinic. Don't have your breakdown in front of me. Brian gritted his teeth. His eyes filled with a strange resentment. I'm not lying. We are partners. Why did you betray me? Why did you change your mind so easily? I almost laughed in his face. After the disgusting thing he did in our past life, how did he have the nerve to blame me for changing my mind? For a moment, I wanted to tell him the truth, that I was reborn too, just to see if he'd feel any guilt or shame. But as I was about to speak, I caught a glimpse of Mason, who had just returned from town. He was standing under a tree, watching me, and his tough, stoic face actually looked hurt. A strange knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I gave Brian a sharp kick in the shin, then hurried past him and into the house. Dinner was a quiet affair. I have nothing to do with Brian. What's going on between you and Brian? After a long silence, Mason and I spoke at the exact same time. Seeing the surprise and delight on Mason's face, I couldn't help but smile too. He's lost his mind. Just ignore him. I'll try to stay away from him from now on. Unfortunately, that simple wish was not going to be easy to fulfill. Brian, as if he really had gone crazy, completely reversed his previous behavior of avoiding me at all costs. Now, he seemed determined to stick to me like glue. During work assignments, he shamelessly insisted on being in my group. He even went to the director and asked to move into the same house as me. Fortunately, the director thought he was nuts too. When we were assigning rooms, you were dead set against rooming with Gary, he said bluntly. Now that everyone's settled, who do you think is going to indulge this nonsense? Get lost. Undeterred by the director's rejection, Brian started trying to win me over with love poems. Gary, look, I wrote this for you. Do you like it? Brian handed me the poem in front of the other volunteers, completely unabashed. Gary reached for it. Let me see the work of our great poet. Brian stood up, shielding the paper from Gary. No, this was written especially for Gary. I looked at Brian like he was insane. In our past life, he treated that part of our history like a dark secret he wished he could erase. Now he was being this brazen? Thankfully, Gary was thick-skinned and just pouted. Weren't you pretending you barely knew Gary a while ago? What's with the change of heart? Brian turned to me, his eyes full of affection. We had a little disagreement, so now I'm courting Gary, hoping he'll forgive me. Gary howled with laughter, egging me on like the pot stirrer he was. Ha ha ha, well Gary, you better read the poem Brian wrote just for you. Who knows, it might be a love poem. I gave Gary a weary look, but under his relentless prodding, I finally took the paper. After reading it, I wrinkled my nose in disgust. Melodramatic nonsense. Brian didn't seem to care. He just grinned. You don't like it? I'll write you a new one next time. No matter how cold I was, Brian clung to me relentlessly. To avoid raising suspicion among the other volunteers, I couldn't be too harsh. After several days of being pestered by him, I came home one evening to find a book of poetry lying on the dining table. I froze, my gaze shifting between the book and Mason, who was eating silently. This poetry book, did you buy it? Yeah. What did you buy it for? Couldn't help but chuckle. Mason didn't seem like the type to enjoy poetry. I saw you liked it, Mason's slightly raspy voice said. I wanted to have more to talk about with you. The smile froze on my face. I slowly turned to look at Mason. He was looking back at me. Though he said nothing more, his dark eyes spoke volumes. My throat felt tight. Finally, I looked down, flustered, avoiding his intense gaze. If you want to learn about poetry, I can teach you. Yeah. A smile broke across Mason's stern face. After that day, it felt like nothing between Mason and me had changed, and yet, something was quietly shifting. Our relationship grew more intimate. Every day after returning home, besides eating and sleeping together, we found more to talk about and more time to spend in each other's company. Brian saw it all. His expression grew darker and more sullen by the day. One time, when he tried to pull me aside to talk about poetry and I instinctively refused, he finally snapped. It's because of Mason again, isn't it? You keep rejecting me for him. Gary, why are you so cruel? I'm the one you love. Have you forgotten me? He looked at me in agony, his eyes turning red. Stop this, I hissed, noticing a villager looking over with a confused expression. Fine, I'll shut up, but you have to come with me somewhere. Brian stared at me stubbornly. With no other choice, I followed him toward the hills behind the village. We walked further and further, and the scenery began to look familiar. My expression soured. Finally, Brian stopped under a giant ginkgo tree. He turned, the crazed look gone from his face. He was blushing slightly as he held out a book of poetry to me, his gesture both shy and solemn. Gary, we're kindred spirits. Will you fight this battle with me, side by side, and support each other through this strange chapter of our lives? My gaze moved slowly from the book to his face. I stared at him for a long time, until the shyness on his face hardened into a stiff mask. After a long while, I finally spoke, my voice soft. Brian, things have changed. People change. Even if you confess in the same place, in the same way, my answer will never be yes. Brian's pupils dilated slightly. You told me our feelings were just a mistake born from huddling together for warmth in a tough situation. You told me to pretend it never happened. I did what you asked. So why are you regretting it now? The color drained from Brian's face in an instant. You too? His voice was barely a whisper. I nodded gently, confirming his suspicion. I was reborn too, and I'm grateful that this time we both have a chance to set things right. From now on, let's go our separate ways. Let's be complete strangers. After saying my piece, I turned to leave. Don't. Brian grabbed my arm instinctively. When he saw the resolve in my eyes, his expression shifted through a storm of emotions. From regret and grief, it finally settled on anger. Then what about Mason? You say you want to set things right, so why are you getting involved with him? Was I the only wrong part of your life? The more he spoke, the more certain he sounded. Is Mason really better than me? Do you think you'll be happy with him? At least now, I truly regret what I did. And we're a much better match. I can't stand the thought of you with someone else more than I can stand the strange looks from others. Gary, please give me another chance. I swear I'll cherish you this time. We have so much in common. I'm a better fit for you than Mason. I firmly pulled his hand away. Choosing Mason might be a mistake, but choosing you is a guaranteed mistake. Making the same mistake once is enough. After leaving Brian frozen in place and heading home, my own mood sank into a funk. Although I had been so resolute in front of him, the truth was, I was still torn. In this life, I was determined to leave Clear Creek as soon as the college entrance exams were reinstated. I wasn't blind to Mason's feelings, but since I was destined to leave, why create attachments here? If I accepted his feelings now only to abandon him in 3 years, wouldn't that make me the same kind of person as Brian? The volunteer dorms were mostly repaired, and some people had already started moving back in. That evening, as soon as Mason returned, I told him I was thinking of moving back to the dorms. The hand that was serving me food froze mid-air. Did I do something wrong? He stared at me, his gaze intense. Can you not move back? I know the director said we could continue staying with a family as long as both sides agree. I turned my head, unable to meet his burning eyes. I believe the college entrance exams will be reinstated sooner or later. When they are, I'm going to find a way to take them. Volunteers have been coming and going all these years. I could be gone at any time. After a pause, I said the final words. Every journey has to end. Mason, I've really enjoyed this time getting to know you. Mason fell silent. I kept my head down, focusing on my food, but my eyes began to burn. I don't know how long passed before I felt something touch my hand. I looked up to see a pile of 10, 5, and $1 bills. Stunned, I looked at Mason. He just pushed the money toward me. This is my discharge pay from the army, and the money I've saved up over the years. I'm a simple guy, I don't know how much you'll need for college, but take it all. I've really enjoyed this time getting to know you, too. I stared at Mason, completely lost for words. Warm tears suddenly slid from the corners of my eyes. Mason fumbled to wipe them away. What's wrong? Is this not enough money? I can go find work and earn more. I looked at him through blurry eyes and asked, if I leave Clear Creek after the exams and never come back, would you still give me this money? Mason pressed his lips together and nodded firmly. Getting an education is a good thing. I'm not giving you this money to tie you to Clear Creek. You belong in a bigger place where you can use your talents. It's okay if you don't come back. The tears flowed freely now, and suddenly, I smiled. I couldn't guarantee that every choice I made would be the right one. But to live timidly for fear of making a mistake, that wasn't worth it. My heart pounded in my chest. I pushed the money back into Mason's hands and then gave his well-defined arm a meaningful squeeze. I can probably scrape together the money for the exams. More than money, what I really need is someone who can help with the heavy lifting. I curved my lips into a smile and looked at him. If you're willing, you can leave with me when I go back to the city. Of course, if you ever miss Clear Creek, I'll come back with you too. An incredible light of pure joy erupted in Mason's eyes. He nodded emphatically and suddenly pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm willing. I wrapped my arms around his waist and looked out the window at the rare winter sun. Feelings can change in an instant. All that matters is cherishing the here and now.